There was a time when Star Wars felt sacred, when each scene was soaked in wonder, when the Force wasn't a mechanic, but a mystery, when heroes rose not through cleverness, but through courage, and destiny meant more than bloodlines and power. The story once echoed like scripture, passed from generation to generation, a myth that wrapped itself around your heart, a universe that taught us about fear and love, about failure and redemption, about standing tall in the storm, even when everything felt lost. But now, something has shifted. The galaxy feels colder, the spark feels dimmer, and the stories, the ones that used to roar with meaning, now murmur with uncertainty. Dialogue replaces discovery, symbolism is swapped for subversion, and the Force feels further away than ever. You feel it too, don't you? That ache when a Star Wars show forgets to believe in itself, that silence when the music swells, but the soul is missing, when lightsabers clash, but nothing changes, when legacies are rewritten, not to reveal truth, but to appear bold. And it's not about being nostalgic. It's about honoring the myth that carried us, the myth that taught us something real, the myth that still lives beneath the noise, waiting to be heard again. Because Star Wars isn't just a setting, it's a promise, a heartbeat, a reminder of who we are when we choose to care. In this video, we're going to dive into how the Acolyte lost its way, how it mistook deconstruction for depth, how it traded myth for mood, and what that means for the future of Star Wars. We'll explore what was lost, what still matters, and why remembering the soul of the story might be the only way to save it. Star Wars was never just lasers and lightsabers. It was never just planets and politics. It was a myth whispered through generations, a story about destiny, about struggle, about the eternal pull between light and shadow. It was Joseph Campbell with a blaster, Shakespeare in hyperspace, but something in the Acolyte feels different, not evolved, but erased, not daring, but detached. It speaks the language of Star Wars, but not its soul. The Force is present, but silent. The conflict is loud, but empty. The wonder, somehow, missing. Where once the stars felt alive with mystery, now they feel like a backdrop for dialogue. Where heroes once questioned fate, now characters argue philosophy with no myth beneath them. The Acolyte doesn't expand the Force, it abstracts it. It doesn't deepen the lore, it distorts it. There's a dissonance in every frame, a sense that the story is fighting itself, trying to be Star Wars, while also avoiding everything that made Star Wars timeless. The Acolyte doesn't feel like a prophecy unfolding. It feels like a checklist being crossed off, with no reverence for the story it joined, and maybe that's where it begins. The question no one asked on screen. What happens when a saga built on myth forgets it is a myth? What's left when the symbols stay, but the spirit fades? The Acolyte tries to answer that, but in doing so, it forgets what it was supposed to be. There's a weight to Star Wars, a gravity that holds the galaxy together, and when that weight is ignored, everything floats away, untethered. The Acolyte doesn't feel like a rebellion, it feels like a rejection, not of evil, but of storytelling. It wants to subvert, to challenge, to unmake. But it never earns that rebellion. It breaks the rules before it understands why they mattered. It dismantles legacy without carrying the cost. It trades myth for mood, and heart for detachment. Characters speak in riddles, but they reveal nothing. Conflicts rise and fall without rhythm, without consequence. There is no anchor, no soul, just motion, just noise. It isn't deconstruction, it's demolition. Without vision, the problem isn't ambition, it's execution. It's the decision to treat Star Wars like a genre instead of a legacy, like a style instead of a story. It's mistaking cynicism for complexity, subversion without purpose, spectacle without substance. And that burns, because the galaxy deserves more. Because this universe was never made to be hollow. Because we grew up with stories that mattered, and now we're watching them fade into echoes, repackaged as something smarter, but so much less human. There's a sadness in watching something lose itself, in seeing a story you loved forget how to feel, forget how to believe. The Acolyte doesn't just break the mold, it forgets why the mold existed, and what we're left with is a shadow. The Jedi aren't symbols of inner conflict anymore. They're just set pieces, hollow robes and empty eyes. The Force doesn't whisper anymore, it lectures, detached and mechanical. The struggle is no longer spiritual, it's academic, emotionless. Moments that should have been revelations become noise. Dialogue buries what silence used to say. Every frame feels like it's explaining something, instead of letting it breathe. The galaxy shrinks, not because of the story, but because of the absence within it. And maybe that's the hardest part. Watching a saga about hope, about faith, about redemption, become cold, sterile, uncertain of itself. The heart of Star Wars used to beat loud enough to shake the stars. Now it flickers, faint, forgotten. It hurts, because we know what it once was. Because we remember twin suns and chosen ones, and impossible choices made in silence. We remember feeling something deep. And now, we feel the distance. The emptiness that comes when the myth goes missing. And yet, beneath the frustration, beneath the sorrow, something still stirs. Because Star Wars is bigger than one show. Bigger than one mistake. It's an echo that refuses to die. A force that moves even when unseen. Even here, there are fragments of wonder. Glimpses of what could have been. A flash of light in the dark. A whisper of something ancient, forgotten. A reminder that the galaxy still lives, even if the story stumbles. Because myth doesn't vanish. It waits. It hides in silence, in longing, in memory, waiting to be remembered. The Acolyte may have missed it, but the myth is still there. Beneath the dialogue, beneath the doubt, still burning. We've seen this before. Tales that strayed, stories that fell, only to rise again, because Star Wars is more than its errors, more than its detours. It's a cycle of failure and rebirth, of endings that lead to beginnings. Again and again. And that is the awe of it all. That a galaxy so vast can still feel intimate, that no matter how far it drifts, it can still come home. That the Force, though quiet, is never gone, only waiting for the story to remember how to speak. There's still time. Time to rediscover the story beneath the spectacle. Time to realign with the myth. To find the soul that made this saga sacred. Not through nostalgia, but through truth. Through characters that feel. Through moments that breathe. All it takes is one honest voice. One story that chooses to remember. The Force doesn't need reinvention. It needs reconnection. It needs storytellers who remember what it means, not what it looks like. Because the heart of Star Wars has always been simple. Hope in the face of fear. Love in the midst of war. Choice in the shadow of destiny. That message is not outdated. It's eternal. There's power in returning to the roots, in letting silence say more than sound, in trusting the audience to feel without being told. The next story can do that. The next chapter can heal what this one broke, but only if it remembers to listen. The galaxy is still open, still vast, still waiting to be told, right? We don't need perfection. We need purpose. We need myth that speaks to the soul, not just the screen. We need stories that remember who they are, that remember who we are. And in that memory, find meaning again. We're not asking for spectacle, we're asking for sincerity. Because Star Wars was never just a brand, it was a belief. And belief doesn't die in failure, it rises through it. It grows through pain, it shines through darkness, and it waits. For someone brave enough to carry it home. The Force is still alive. It just needs to be felt again. But what if it doesn't? What if this moment, this story, this silence, becomes the new normal? What if we stop asking for more, because we forgot what more felt like? What if the myth fades, not with anger, but with apathy? That's the end we should fear most. The one we don't even notice. That's the real danger. Not that the stories change, but that they forget why they were told. That subversion replaces sincerity. That spectacle smothers soul. That the Force becomes a backdrop, instead of the heartbeat. And when that happens, everything collapses in plain sight. The Acolyte didn't fail because it was bold. It failed because it was empty. Because it mistook disconnection for depth. Because it forgot that the most powerful thing a story can do is believe in something. Stories without belief are just noise dressed in lights. Star Wars was built on tragedy, but it never stayed there. It always rose, always reached, always dreamed. But this feels different. This feels like the beginning of forgetting. And forgetting is the most tragic end of all. Because when myth dies, meaning dies with it. So we must remember, not just the names and planets, but the feeling, the myth, the soul. We must remember what Star Wars is supposed to be, not because we want the past back, but because the future depends on it. And if no one else will protect that legacy, then we must.